In today's episode, we're joined by Shawn Massie. Shawn is the founder and CEO of Scratch Digital, where he leads digital marketing and SEO initiatives. With a strong background in digital strategy and brand growth, Shawn has helped numerous businesses improve their online presence and customer engagement. Shawn is known for his strategic vision and commitment to delivering measurable results for his clients. In today's episode, we're going to talk with Shawn about how CRO can be used to drive positive results in SEO. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Digital Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Eli Adams. Today's episode is brought to you by fireusmarketing.com, where SEO solutions pave the way to digital excellence. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. Like I said, sort of offline, I was talking about how I found you on LinkedIn because I was looking into CRO and SEO and how to improve it. And you had a lot of really awesome posts, really plainly teaching people how important it is to have CRO involved in your SEO game. So I'm excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time and joining us today. Before we dive into the fun part, the tactical stuff, let's get to know Shawn a little bit. So tell me about yourself. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What'd you want to be when you were little? And how'd you go from there to where you're at today?
Okay. The year was 1986. I grew up in LA, from California originally, and I moved out to Arizona, where I'm based today in the Phoenix area, in the early 90s. My parents wanted to basically, kind of move here because it was blowing up at the time. So if you can believe it, a house at that time, I think they bought it for like $165,000 or something,
Which was
crazy
probably
like that.
expensive at the
So
time.
at the time, it was probably good, yeah, but I think they sold it for like 800.
Wow.
So it's just crazy how much it's blown up
Yeah.
out here. But so yeah, growing up, I am a very visual learner, and I had a eye for kind of art and design was kind of where I gravitated towards. But at the same time, I was really obsessed with science. So I was already kind of getting this Venn diagram where I thought I was going to become an
Mm-hmm.
engineer. I was like, hey, maybe I can design something and I can actually build it, or I'll know like the physics behind it, things like that. And so I always wanted to be an architect or an engineer. Those were like one of the two things I was kind of leaning towards. Talk about a parent's dream, having your kid want to be one of those two things
Yeah.
growing up. I was the like good student, wanted to do all that kind of stuff. And really cool too out here in Scottsdale, Frank Lloyd Wright had a huge presence. So I got to take a lot of classes at the Frank Lloyd Wright house called Taliesin West, and that was a lot of
Mhm.
fun. And then in college, I started out in that route. I was doing classes in honors physics and all the engineering classes and things like that. And I will never forget, I shadowed someone one day because it was a let's go out into the field and see like the career you're choosing. Go work next to some of these people for a day. And I talked to this one guy who worked at Honeywell. And I thought, this is for me. This is what I'm going to be doing. And he wound up telling me how he has been working on this one little small actuator for
Mm.
airbags that deploys when it senses a shift in velocity and that basically deploys the airbag or acceleration, excuse me. And I was like, oh, that's cool. How long you been doing this for? And he was like, oh, like 20 something years. And I was like, oh, what'd you do before this? And he was like, no, this is what I've been doing for 20 something years.
Wow.
And I scared the crap out of me. I was like, I don't want to do that.
Oh.
So I think within the same week, I changed my major over to
Mhm.
business. And I was like, okay, what can I do that still scratches that itch for me, but isn't, where I might feel
Mhm.
trapped? And so I chose marketing, specifically digital marketing. And I was really getting obsessed with coding at the time because you need it for engineering too. I was
Mhm.
programming like robotics and stuff like that, which I enjoyed. And so I figured, okay, well, what if I apply this over to coding websites and coding programs or software? And so that's kind of where I started leaning
Mhm.
towards. And along the way, I discovered SEO and basically how to now get people to see the cool stuff I was trying to
Mhm.
build. And so I know that's a condensed version of my childhood, but essentially that was always my
Yeah.
background, and it just kind of naturally sculpted me towards what I do today. And I haven't looked back since. I've enjoyed it every step of the way.
That's interesting you had that one experience where you went and talked to a guy, kinda shadowed him, and that decision changed the trajectory of your life, right? I've talked about this in the podcast before, but a similar thing happened to me where, I'm a little bit older than you, and, so, like, the internet was kind of just barely a thing when I was in high school, right? Like, at least for from my small town. And I was bored one day, and I asked my dad, I was like, I'm bored. What should I do? And he goes, go to the internet. But like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I'd love to be an astronomer. And he goes, go to the internet, search for astronomers and reach out to them, send them an email or whatever, contact us and just ask them questions. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And so I did that one day, and I reached out to a handful of them, and all of them were like, I wouldn't recommend you go into this field. It's there's like, so many years of schooling and science just to work for a government agency that doesn't pay you anything. And they like listed out all the
Yeah.
classes I would have to take in college. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
What great advice by your
I
dad,
know.
though. That was
I know.
amazing.
SEO didn't even exist back then either. So it wasn't like I could
Yeah.
know what I was going to do when I was older. But yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
look, the internet is limitless. You can go find anything on the internet. And this was, gosh, 20 or more years ago when I sat down
Yeah.
to do this search, and I didn't know what questions to ask, and he gave me that advice. And man, it's a good thing I did that. So that's funny that you had kind of that pivotal change
Yeah.
as well.
Do you think your dad, part of the motivation behind that was saving money as well? If you just figure it out now, I don't have to pay for these classes that are gonna go
Honestly,
nowhere.
I think he was just tired of me saying I'm bored. Like, if you have kids, you know how that goes. Like, my kids are like, "I'm bored." I'm like, "Okay, go vacuum." I don't know, go do something else.
Yeah.
But, back then, we didn't really have, like, screen time caps like I have for my kids because there's just so much more
Yeah.
on.
Same. It was just go
Yeah,
outside to do
yep,
something.
absolutely. So you switch your major to digital marketing. What was your first, like, where did you dip your toe into actually working in digital marketing? Was it as at an agency? Did you start out as an intern, like, in-house? How did
Mhm.
that play out for you?
Okay, this is a fun story. So, I graduated college in '08, and before I graduated, I knew that I didn't want to graduate and be like, "Okay, I got a degree, where's my
Mhm,
job?" Feel all, you know, emboldened to assume that I could just get something with a degree. So, I was hell-bent on trying to land a full-time office job before I graduate because I knew if I had something and I started now, I could graduate, still work there, and make money
yeah,
while I was thinking about what I wanted to do, as opposed to having these
mhm,
gaps. Little did I know that '08 would become the
yep,
recession, first of many events in our
yep,
generation's lives. Um, but I had found a job with the company who wanted to, or what they did was they helped basically companies find hotels and other venues for their big corporate events and meetings. So they were a event planner, or basically the middleman that could find the site selection for your
mhm,
event. So if Nestle, for example, held a conference for 400,000 people, they worked with a broker to go broker a deal with Marriott to essentially say you should host it in this city because they're going to give you the best deal, but also they have the surrounding infrastructure to support your
mhm,
meeting. And here's what it looks like, and here's like the room blocks you can get, and here's how much F&B would be, and all that kind of stuff. And I loved planning. I was a big, like, kind of meticulous, almost OCD
yeah,
planner. So I thought, hey, I can help with that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll get to travel. Let's
mhm,
see. So my junior year of college, I got that job. So 2006 or 2007. And I was not doing the planning. I was doing basically the grunt work. I
yeah,
was the guy that was like, hey, why don't you call ahead and make sure they got all these things? Let's make sure you're collecting invoices for our associates. But at the same time, they had nobody else in the company that was really good with websites. And as I mentioned, that was kind of something I was already
mhm,
diving into. So I was like, hey, I'll do it. I know it's not my job description, but I can build sites for you guys. So I was building the conference websites
mm,
essentially to get sponsors and also help attendees know where to go, what to do, drive up ticket sales, but then also help the associates that were working at the company kind of promote themselves and say, look what we did for this other company. This is why you should work with us to go plan your next event. So I was building all these websites back then, and I was like hard coding
mm,
these
mhm,
things, right? There was no like CMS back then,
yeah,
really. I think WordPress, I don't know when it came out, but it was like really rough around the
yeah,
edges, and it was blogs only at
mhm,
the time. So I was opening up Front Page or
mhm,
Dreamweaver or
yep,
one of these other like programs, and I was writing it all. And then eventually I was really getting involved in getting my like tendrils throughout the company where it's like, well, we can't necessarily do this without
mhm,
Shawn. So why don't we send Shawn to this
Mm.
location? And that was the best for like probably 2 years until the recession. I got to travel on the company dime to all kinds of exotic places where these meetings
Wow.
were. And I started working on the international side more. So I was going to Singapore and Thailand, and I got to go to like Malta and Italy. And I'm like a junior in college.
Wow.
So I had some classes where I couldn't make the classes. I was like, I'm sorry, I won't be
Hmm.
there. I'm working a full-time job. And I was trying to juggle both things, which, is such a non-problem really. It's such a great experience builder for me. So when I graduated, I had all this experience. But the recession hit, and so all that travel stopped. So I feel lucky that within those 2 years, I got it
Hmm.
in before companies stopped spending on that. Eventually, it rebounded, but at that point, I had already kind of set my sights on the path that eventually would lead me to the career I have today. But that was my
Mm.
entry into digital marketing, was building these sites and getting to travel and basically run the site and be on site for the registration and part of the
Mm.
event.
A lot of the up and comer marketers who are listening to this podcast will probably never really understand the 2008 struggles, right?
No,
Like my wife and I, we got married in 2007, and we were both working 2 jobs, like still barely making it at that time. We
yeah,
were working some side hustles at the same time, and man, like things were tough. Like and this is not about me, so I don't want to go too too deep into me, but
oh please, I would love to
I
hear.
mean, we ended up moving 6 times in our first year of marriage, and out of necessity. It wasn't because 'cause we're like, "Hey, we're bored." We had one of the landlords decided to sell the house we were in, so we had to move out. Then,
Oh
we
yeah.
moved to a different one, and it rained so hard that part of the roof caved in, and it was gonna take too long to get to fix it, and they didn't have the money or whatever, but, like, we just moved and moved and moved, and our mail forwarding didn't keep up because we moved so much, and I didn't realize that in the one bank account that I wasn't monitoring too well was my car insurance, and it ended up lapsing. We ended up getting in a car accident with lapsed car insurance, totaling the car,
Oh
and still
no.
had a loan to pay off. Like, we had so much going on in that 1 year that we ended up getting sued from the one car. There were 5 cars. We ended up getting sued a year and a half later from the car that we hit, even though there were 4 others involved. And, man, it was a rough couple of years, but we stuck it out and ended
Yeah,
up getting out of it. But I don't think a lot of the younger generation will ever really understand, what the country went through in 2007, 2008. It was a tough time for a lot of people.
it was. The hiring slowed down a ton. Spending on any discretionary stuff felt like it was non-existent for a little while
Yeah.
there. And the whole like, there were people who lost their jobs obviously and tons of layoffs, but graduating during that time for me also was very uncertain for a lot of classmates. And so the fact that I had something at least was a huge
Yeah,
burden lifted off my shoulders, that I was like, I'm lucky enough to just keep my
for
head
sure.
down until I wound up finding something. But that's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot more there's a lot more to that story maybe sometime.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah,
We need to get a drink after this and kind of unravel some
I
of these
know, for
stories.
real. So, okay, so now we know how you got into it. So now tell me what you're currently working on that excites you.
Okay, so I have been agency side after that experience most of my
Okay.
career, and I have wanted to basically build something myself for a while, but I didn't know what shape or form that
Mhm,
would take. And in the last couple of years, or probably like 3, 4 years, I had been with one agency for a long time, and they were great to me, and met a lot of cool people there, and 2 people in particular, Alex Diaz and Chris Jones, who I wound up starting my new company with. I had met through
mm,
this agency, and we've always been close. They became very close friends of mine. I consider them best friends, and we just kind of kept in touch. And earlier this year, I wound up leaving my agency. Didn't have a plan. I just wanted to spend more time with my
mhm,
kid because I was falling into a rut where I was overworking a lot, and I have a 4-year-old,
mhm.
and I felt like I was missing out a little bit on some of the growing up and how fast it goes. And so eventually I was like, hey, maybe I could start something with them. And we wound up just this month launching officially Scratch Digital, which is our own agency. And it's been amazing so far. great reception. But I'm proud to basically I built the site myself, built the services that we're doing, the programs, the strategies are all things that, I've done for the last 15 years. But being able to not only like sell the story, but then execute on everything I want to do it the way I want to do it has been like really
Yeah.
rewarding for me because typically I would train up someone to basically kind of execute on the vision that I had
Mhm.
just created or sold because I was usually the first person a client would talk to. Then then I would kind of come up with a strategy based on what I
Mhm.
heard. And the strategy would be, you know, kind of really detailed to their specific needs. Do they have certain milestones or targets they're trying to hit this year? What's their market look like? What's their customer demographics? Have they shifted? Like, what's the
Mhm.
problem? But after I created that strategy, I got to supervise some of the work that was being done, but I wasn't in the trenches as much as I'd like to be with some of that
Yeah.
stuff. And I didn't feel like I was losing my edge at all. I just felt like I kind of watched, I helped make a baby and the baby just walked off and
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to like watch it grow or help shape or
Mhm.
nurture it. And so I was like, man, if I do this myself, I think I can like see it through to fruition. And luckily, that's been the case so far. So I've been able to kind of execute on it. I've had some people reach out and say, aren't you like kind of over or past the point of like doing the actual stuff itself? Like, don't you want to like hire someone and train them? Like, no, I want to do it myself.
Yeah.
I get satisfaction out of seeing the graph go up and to the right and knowing exactly what caused and what I did to do it. And talk about like good marketing. You never have to sell if you can have results that speak for themselves. You wind up, letting that kind of be the way that you find new people.
Yeah.
So that has been really rewarding for me, and I'm very proud to just have launched that brand.
How fun. I applaud you for taking on that challenge and starting an agency. Me doing the same thing. It's been fun, rewarding, and difficult at the same time, right? Having to go from managing teams to say, "Hey, here's the vision, go do it," to doing everything on your own. There are some challenges in doing that, and there's challenges to scaling in that at the same time. But I'm with you, man. Like being a part of it, the process the whole way and being able to see what I love about what you're
Yeah.
doing is what I'm trying to do in my agency as well is not be so cookie cutter. It's not, hey, you get X, Y, and Z and bring on the next client. You get X, Y, and Z, bring on the next client. It's not
Yes.
like a conveyor belt.
Yes.
It's you look at the client's website, you analyze it, you see the needs, you go and fix the areas that are broken. And it's not just this very templated approach. So I think that's what SEO should be. I think that's what agencies should focus on. You'll
Yeah.
keep people long term by doing that. And it's just more authentic. It's more honest. You'll get better results. So good for you for doing it that way. I applaud you for
Yeah.
doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, to your point, I would interview when we were hiring at my previous company all kinds of SEOs that came from other agencies where that's what they were
Mhm.
doing. They were I have 30 clients and I'm basically doing reporting and X, Y, and Z for them. And then I move on to the next one and I have a basically a timer before I got to move on. They're not, none of the clients were getting any custom attention or
Yeah.
touch. Um, and that wasn't the case for everyone, but I mean, the majority of people I interviewed were basically at previous companies that had
Hmm.
that. And as a company, like hiring SEO, I mean, you know this probably, like our industry has some bad reputations
Yep.
out there sometimes, and it's those types of companies that are doing that. They're just churning and burning, or they're handing you off to someone junior, or there's just not a lot of care
Yeah.
given to the business. And I felt like that was something that went well for me in my career was, I mean, I used to have managers get mad at me because I was spending too much time on an account sometimes.
Hmm.
But I was like, I haven't cracked the case yet. Like I need to spend more time and figure
Yeah.
this out because I cared about the results in the business, right? And so that's something that's important to me right now. And you mentioned scale too. I've had immediately people, and I fault no one for wanting to scale their company. That's generally the
Yeah.
goal of starting a company is to go make money, make more money. But at the moment, I have a bit of an aversion to scale because I'm like, well, what happens in that scenario? I'm going to wind up becoming the owner of a company that does the thing that I started this company to solve
Yeah.
for. And I was like, I think what's more important to me at the moment is my lifestyle. The reason I had started this was to spend time with the
Yeah.
kid. So I need to constantly keep an eye on am I balancing work life enough and feeling comfortable in my situation to the point where I can continue to do all the work myself and not need to hire? Is there a ceiling on that amount? And so I haven't reached it
Yeah.
yet. And hopefully I do soon, but I don't know what will happen when I reach that
Yeah.
point. Cause then that's going to be like, okay, well, does it make sense to scale? Probably. But at the same time, am I going to fall into the trap of now just doing exactly what I didn't want to do at the previous place?
I
So,
think there's ways to avoid it. I think you can scale and still avoid that
yeah.
problem. I've been thinking about the same thing, right? But I think it's all about hiring people
Yeah.
similar to you. If you can clone yourself, basically, right? People who
Yeah.
care,
That's,
people who know the ins and outs of SEO. Like when I started this first podcast, we were talking offline about how I originally had 10 topics and it's grown into over 40 topics. Like SEO is simple and difficult at the same time. And so you can't
yeah.
just you can't be an account manager at a large SEO agency and learn all 40 of these topics to be able to go and take it in-house and be an expert. So there's a lot that you need to learn to be like an expert SEO, I think long term for sure. So let's jump into the tactical section. So this podcast we wanted to talk about CRO and SEO, and you had mentioned offline that it's two of the main things that you're focusing on a lot in the agency right now. So first of all, there may be some people who don't know what CRO stands for. So maybe describe what that is, describe why you think it's
Yeah.
important for SEO, and then we'll dig into some other deeper questions after that.
Okay. So it stands for conversion rate optimization, which you can think of as testing and messaging and all the things that come with basically testing into the best way to convert a user who's coming to your site at various stages of their journey and making sure that they're being presented with the right information, the right calls to action, and that the flow is very frictionless, that it's super easy for them to go ahead and do the conversion or whatever action you want them to take. And oftentimes, if you are just joining a company in-house or even as an agency and you're being onboarded, if there's one lever you can pull in the first week to basically have a big impact, it's usually looking at the funnel and figuring out what could convert better. Because if you can move that just 1 or 2 points, that can mean thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a
Yeah.
business, depending on how much, revenue is coming through. And it varies, of course, by, if it's a lead generation versus like a retail conversion for an e-commerce site. But I love CRO because it's not like SEO, which everyone says it takes time. You're investing in the long term. CRO is like paid search sometimes, where it's like you turn it on and it
Mhm.
happens. And I've tested into some wins early on when I start engagements that can buy you the time it takes for SEO because you've already got a big win under your belt. There's trust established. And now it's like, hey, listen, now we're converting better. Let me go start to drive more and more people to these pages that we've got optimized for
Mhm.
conversion. And we're going to get more mileage now out of the audience and the organic search that we're going to be driving. The other reason why I think they're connected is if someone says they want SEO and someone's thinking rankings or traffic, okay, that buys you enough time to maybe go do some of that stuff. But at some point, the question will always come, what is this traffic getting us? Like, is this traffic worth it? Or like, what is that? And then you can kind of get into the whole intent stages, or you can bucket and say, well, this is a blog post versus this is a standalone, like a landing page. Um, or maybe this is someone who's kind of got an informational query versus someone who's got a transactional query, whatever. But that's still not necessarily answering the question of what's it doing for the
Mhm.
business. And so, like, my favorite piece of advice I ever got that I live by is work backwards. So start with the company's basically top
Mhm.
line, because the rest of that from top line to bottom line is up to the company. It's right,
Mhm.
their overhead, their expenses, whatever. So the revenue is coming from what? Okay, how much revenue is coming from this service or this product versus this category, whatever the business breakout looks like. And then you ask them, where would you like more business to come from? Well, it's usually determined by profit margin. So they're like, well, it'd be great if we had more business coming in from this segment because we make the most on that. Or we feel like we're under indexing on
Mhm.
this. Okay, great. I have my directive. So I'm going to go a step above that now. Where's all that coming from? Which channels? And they'll say, well, we'd like more of it to come from organic search because that's a better ROI for us. And that's why they're bringing us on as
Mhm.
SEOs. Okay. But organic search, is it typically the first touch point, second touch point? Is it the last? What's your attribution model? So I'm already kind of understanding moving up the funnel, or not really funnel, but the process of understanding the tracking, the reporting, all the attribution models and how that's working. Okay, now I know how it's getting credited. Now I know how where it sits in the channel distribution, where it's what percentage it makes up. And then I ask, what about resources? Do I have dev dedicated to this? Well, SEO has been traditionally deprioritized. So, if you're going to do something, it might make a sprint next
Yeah.
month or whatever. Okay. So, why, if you think that this can be your better channel for ROI, can I ask for more resources if I have some low hanging
Mhm.
fruit or things I can fix? That's kind of something early on I'll ask, and they'll say, well, yeah, if you got stuff, like we can dedicate some teams to it.
Yeah.
Great. Now I'm like, okay, now what do I think is going to actually make the biggest difference right away? And I can tell that if I drive more traffic to this section of the site or this section of the site because of how it's currently performing, this would be where I would move the needle
Mhm.
first. So let me prioritize my audit or my recommendations to go after what's currently converting the most. And then I just keep going up. And eventually you work your way up to awareness and stuff that might be, it's not necessarily when they're ready to convert, but it's something that's going to take time. But that sits down here on the
Yeah.
roadmap because you got to go solve the things that are going to make more money now because you're working against the clock. There's a quarter to finish. There's a time that you need to basically do, or even maybe you sold a
Mhm.
forecast and you need to go do that kind of stuff. And so that whole process, which I probably spent too much time on explaining, if I could tell you you can convert 5% better on any of those things, you would take that deal right now
Yeah.
because it's going to make you hitting those forecasts or those numbers so much
Mhm.
easier. And so that's why CRO is so important because you are essentially removing the bottleneck on all the work that's coming downstream. And I think that's a huge thing that people
Yeah.
overlook. They just jump straight into keyword research or backlinks or
Mhm.
something when they should be focusing on where's the bottleneck?
Not to mention everything that's come out over the last year from Google about how, um, customer interaction actually impacts your SEO, right? So if you're having
Yes.
a, better user experience on site and a higher conversion rate and happier customers, ultimately it's gonna affect your SEO in a positive way. So you're gonna rank better and convert better, right?
Yes. There is definitely a knock on effect to doing all of that kind of stuff. And I would say for mobile SEO and
Yeah.
everything else with, user experience and how you're being judged from smartphone, of course, it's gonna have an impact on your rankability as
Mhm.
well, like you
Yeah,
said.
100%. So if I'm a business and I'm listening to this and I'm like, okay, all that sounds great. Like, where do I start? How do I know what to do? Is there a tool that you can recommend, or do you just go kind of look at the at analytics and say, here are the most popular pages. Let's start here. Like, what's your process in figuring that out?
Um, so if I was gonna break in that long description I had into 3 pieces, the first piece, like the top, I would say Search Console. Definitely go install Search Console and maybe use a third-party tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush, SEO Clarity, any of those out there to really understand visibility. That's your first piece is visibility. In the middle, I would say you're definitely gonna wanna use, any heat mapping software or you want to know how people are flowing throughout the site, you might be using Hotjar, Crazy, you might be using Amplitude and Segment, things like that. And then the conversion piece or the revenue, taking care of the business part, that's analytics for sure, or Adobe Analytics or whatever the company's
Mhm.
using. Um, and you want to make sure they're all connected. So you want to understand how visibility is going to impact essentially organic traffic to these page
Yeah.
types. And then in these page types, you want to know where are users getting hung up? What are they doing? Are they bouncing? Are they going to somewhere else? And then how is that traffic coming back to the site? Everyone likes to imagine their site in a single session user journey. But let's be honest, how many of us have bought a clothing item, booked a trip, or done any of these things the first time you came to a
Right.
website? You're sitting on it, you're thinking about it, you're
Yep.
coming back. So you got to think about what other surfaces are they going to be touching and what are they going to do before they convert? And so there's software out there they can do that for. But to your question, use analytical tools or platforms that you've got set up to really kind of get your whole picture and your universe understood And if you're going to put an organic search filter or lens on that entire landscape, apply that filter to it and use Search Console to kind of be the entry point into the journey of data that you're looking at and how it flows.
Are there common areas that you see when clients come in and you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go check here because" well, so let's say you use the data and you find out here are the most traffic pages. You go to those pages.
Yeah.
You've done this so much that you could probably look at it and be like, "Oh, I would change this, 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 this." Like, are there common areas that
Yeah.
people should be aware of and look at once they find those high traffic websites?
Yes. So two things. One, I would say I always find that people are putting a ton of effort and time into editorial content, but they are not making it easy for editorial content to lead to consideration. So they're not putting a compare page or a value prop driven page that's all about testimonials or social proof or things that maybe pricing, for example, make it really easy to explain like why a certain tier is worth it.
Mhm.
And so that is usually left in the header nav and it's not woven into the blog post or something else. If you are going to get someone into a topic that is, this versus this type topic, why not make it super easy for them to then decide if it really is worth that investment and get them to sign up for the 7-day trial or whatever the call to action is. And so I often see that compare pages and other consideration type pages. It could be things like your verticals that you're in, the customer testimonials, um, you know, any of those types of things are basically never performing as well as they should. They're probably relegated to secondary nav or the footer and the buried, but they should be more prioritized. And then the second thing I would say is so far everything I've talked about is intrinsic. It's looking at just the pages they
Mhm.
have. I immediately go to competitors and I do a gap analysis and I say, is there any page type that you don't have that we think your competitors are using to success? And oftentimes there is. And it might be masked as a page they already have, but I'll say, look at this section. This section calls out something that you have nowhere else represented on the site. Let's add this to your pricing page. Let's add this to your market page or whatever the case is. And usually that's something that can not only help conversion, but now for SEO, I've got content speaking about this exact thing that the competitors were getting for free because we never had any content about it that now I'm basically competing against them for. So I use a gap analysis to really identify like this is 100 pages of your site and here's 100 pages of your competitor. Are there 10 of those that you don't even have a comparable page for? If so, let's go create those.
So do you normally do like a crawl of the competitor website and just compare it, or do you go one by one and look at
Yeah.
it, or what's the best way to find out what pages they have that you don't?
I'd use a crawl right
Okay.
away. So I'm a big Screaming Frog
Okay.
guy. Lumar's good too. Used to be called Deep Crawl if you
Mhm.
have a big
Yeah.
site. I've worked on some, 6 million page sites before where you need something big like that. Shout out to Botify too. Botify does a great job of doing the crawl and connecting to the
Mm.
analytics. So if you can afford Botify, I recommend them. They will help you understand not only how bots and users are crawling and indexing and coming through the site, but also compared to your downstream analytics and explain that there's a certain page that should be here and it's down here and it looks like it's causing an
Mhm.
issue. Um, and so I love Botify for that, but can't afford Botify at the moment. So I use Screaming Frog to crawl
Right.
the site, and then I go through. Spot Screaming Frog does a nice job of saying like what the crawl depth
Mhm.
is. It starts at 0 for the homepage, 1 for everything linked from the homepage, 2, etc. So I cap that at
Mm.
3, and then I go, okay, within 3 clicks of the homepage, what's here and what can I work with and what do I think needs to be looked
Yeah.
at? And I set that list against my client list to understand if there's any gaps.
I love that. Is there a different approach when you're looking at mobile versus desktop?
For which pages exist?
Yeah, no, as far as, like, looking at what pages to start with to do CRO, because obviously if it's a responsive site, it
Oh,
looks
yeah.
differently. So what's your approach when it comes to mobile?
Yeah. So any responsive design should do a good job of narrowing the exit
Mm.
paths from your desired journey. However, it should inform the customer or the potential customer of like any of the information you think is going to be a holdup for
Mhm.
them. And so I usually like to go through and crawl with smartphone to see what is visible to bots and crawlers for the first, like, because for a visibility standpoint, Some sites I've worked on before where it's like, oh yeah, we don't render any of this kind of stuff until the user gets down here. And I'm like, oh, is it lazy loaded? They're like, no, it's actually using React to like kind of call this external source.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, okay, so none of this is visible to
Mm-hmm.
Google. Tight. So you kind of have to go through and like really understand from a mobile POV like what Google can even
Yeah.
see. That's like step one is, I mean, making sure the page is available to be
Mm-hmm.
found, and then from there ranking. But the same thing goes for like mobile navs and any responsive design where they might be slightly different than desktop. I will go through and say, okay, is it the same prioritization from this competitor that looks like this is how they are featuring a certain page? Because you can usually tell from a competitor, at least one that's doing it well, what is probably a important surface for a customer to see before they
Mm.
convert. And then you can kind of go audit your client's website to make sure they're doing the exact same type of thing, or they have an alternative solution that accomplishes the same goal.
So when making these changes both on desktop as well as mobile, do you recommend that they use a tool to do an A/B test, or do you just go change it and wait for the data, or what's your approach in that regard?
Test always,
Okay.
I believe, unless there's some urgency behind something. I like to test
Okay.
first. But to be clear, there are tools out there that will say they do SEO A/B
Mm.
testing. A bot comes across whatever it comes across. So Google bot will see version A or version B, and that's how it's going to determine what's on your
Mhm.
site. So just know that there's no like true variant group for SEO. However, there is the temporary content that you want to test, and then you can roll out that content permanently. And so sometimes I will see people use Google, just like Tag Manager to like do something,
Mhm.
or VWO or Optimizely, and those work well. But just know for SEO A/B testing, like you're kind of at the mercy of which version Googlebot's going to see. But for CRO, we've been using VWO a lot. I feel like it does a good job of letting us tweak interfacing, and getting to what we call stat sig. So a 95% confidence interval that the changes we're making are the reason for one version doing better than another. And then once you have that, then you can basically, do you decide to go run the test on a larger group, larger data set to be sure, or are you confident enough that you could roll it out? But either way, I like to use something like that, to basically kind of first understand for sure that what you're about to do is going to have a positive impact, as
Mhm.
opposed to being like, what's that year over year gap that we have there? And you're like, oh, we ran a test and it didn't really
Yeah.
work. That's when I prefer to do something like a split
Do you
test.
ever recommend that people use paid ads to get the CRO numbers faster before implementing the SEO portion of it?
Interesting question. If they have the budget, I love testing with paid search because you are getting a much tighter filter, I guess, on your customer
Mhm.
segment. You're able to control a little bit more location, what terms they're finding your ad for, what messaging or copies on the ad before they even get to the page. And there's things like retargeting even that you can use for that. So yes, I do love having paid search budget allocated to testing. And if you can carve that out, I highly suggest you do that.
Okay, smart. Do you feel like a lot of websites have like forms on a lot of pages and either trying to capture for a lead to do drip campaigns or whatever. Do you feel like forms are overdone? Do they hurt the CRO, or is it just a matter of like how you implement the form and ask the right questions?
I mean, forms are necessary for a lot of people, but I do not recommend putting all the fields up front for sure. More and more testing that we've done has proven that progressive forms are the way to
Okay.
go, where you are asking for little information up front. In fact, even on your first call to action, I don't recommend putting a form field on the very
Hmm.
first step. So just have like your message on the hero or whatever service it is and be like, this is exactly why you need to use this. You can't afford not to use this service or this product, and then the call to action should not be something that's like get started or talk to sales is the worst one you could ever think of.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing people want to do is talk to a
Yeah.
salesperson or even pick up the phone or do anything. They want it to be super easy and basically like click, 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 click,
Yeah.
I'm done. So you make the message on the contact button or the button be really like, hey, no commitment up here, just super easy. Start the step. We even tested things like no credit card required right
Mm.
underneath the button. That has a huge lift in click
Mm-hmm.
through rate because people are thinking, okay, well, when do I get asked for the
Yeah.
credit card? So having that is a big step. But once they click that button, then the fields they're presented with, try to limit it to 3 or less if you can.
Okay.
So if you need like the name or you need like an industry they're in or you need something, limit it because they're presented now with something that seems manageable. Okay, I'll fill this in really quick. They click next and maybe you present them with 2 more fields or something. If you're going to present them with more fields, you have to give them an understanding of 2 things. Where are they in the process? Webflow does this
Mm-hmm.
well sometimes where you'll see like the progress bar across the
Yeah.
top. You could even put like step 2 of 4. If you have more than 4 steps, don't put step 2 of 4 because then it's like step 2 of 6 or
Mm-hmm.
more and it's like daunting. So prefer the bar when it's more than 4
Mm-hmm.
steps. Um, and then the second thing you got to do for them is you got to explain why this is required or important. So basically, you'll see some sites say, "We use this data to do blank." If you explain to me why I'm going to give this to you and what I should get on the next screen, I'm more likely to fill that out. So, long answer to your question, but use fields and forms, split them out if you can, and just make it more manageable with a mouse or trackpad versus me having to type a ton if I
Mm.
can. So, their location, for example, if I click in the field, try to assume like you know where they are and it pre-fills for
Mm-hmm.
me, things like that.
Smart. I like that. I have a few clients that have a lot of forms everywhere. They have WordPress websites. Do you have any recommendations on good WordPress forms to use, like that are progressive?
Man, it's been a while since I've built. I mean, WP Forms, does that even still exist? I bet it
Yeah.
does, but I haven't used it. WooCommerce does a good job actually of some
Mhm.
forms. But I would say I don't know if plugins off the top of my head. I'm a big Webflow guy. That's like what I've been using the most
Okay.
these days. But in WordPress, if you or any platform for that matter, if you can limit the forms where they are, some people like to think, oh, I'm going to put it on the bottom of the page as well. So if I scroll down, like it makes it easy for them to do
Hmm.
it there. Same principle applies. Add the button down there, but don't put the form
Okay.
down there. So make wherever they're going to see multiple things all converge to one point. So it's straightforward. And no matter where I go, I'm going to that thing. Unless you have an e-commerce site or something else that makes sense to like, you're trying to do something over here, or there's multiple calls to
Yeah.
action, newsletters versus signups, things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So unfortunately, no, I don't know the plugins
That's fine.
WordPress, but
I'll go do more research,
yeah,
but it was just actually a problem I was looking at today, and I was like, oh, okay, what forms do I need to look at for this specific client?
yeah.
So I'll go do some homework. That's not a problem at all. So where do you see the future going in SEO and CRO?
I bet everyone says AI when they
They
get
do.
asked a future
They sure
question.
do.
It's definitely
Hmm.
pervasive right now. I think one thing for me that's going to be big for SEO is you saw how Google kind of rushed the whole AI overview
Hmm.
thing. And they're losing out possibly a small sliver of search traffic to
Yeah.
ChatGPT and Claude and other AI engines. I think the future of SEO really is going to be how to make the content very fast in terms of digestion. Like
Mm.
I know exactly what I'm reading and I know the answer. So that's things like summaries at the top of articles as opposed to like table of contents and you have to get to the bottom before you understand like what the
Yeah.
takeaway is. Think of like recipes that tell you their life story before you get to the
Hmm.
recipe. I don't think those things are going to continue to always kill it. I think eventually you're going to need to see the recipe at the
Yeah.
top and then there's going to be more information. Hopefully, fingers
Hmm.
crossed. But I think that the attention span is going to continue to get smaller and there will be more of a priority on content that gives you a very quick answer or understanding of what exactly you're reading, the Cliff Notes version of stuff, because you can kind of see already how that's shifting already in the search result pages, like with AI overview and stuff like that. But even like generative AI, you're not even putting in any of the work to like come up with something. You're letting it do it for you, and it's already coming up with those summaries. So the feeling I get is that like not just SEO, but digital marketing in general is going to shift towards this. I want to consume faster, faster, faster. How do I understand your product, your business, your service, or what page I'm reading within an instant? And then convince me that it is worth my time to now go read a little bit more of this kind of stuff. And so maybe those like page signals around how much time I'm spending or, what I'm doing on your site will become important. They already
Yeah.
are, but more important. And for conversion, I think the same thing applies. How do I know what you're about to ask me and what I'm about to give you? How do I feel like the trust is established faster
Mhm.
and I don't need to go book a demo or do something? I want to self-serve. Give me a story demo that shows me an interactive. I can play with it right now, and yep, I'm sold. I'm going to go buy. Give me a
Yeah.
trial versus needing to wait for a salesperson to schedule a demo with me. I think that's the future of conversion is just all self-service portals
Yeah,
essentially.
I think you're onto something there, especially that last point. I do not like getting salespeople to call me and walk through a demo and then try to sell me on it. Like,
Yeah.
I would much rather go through an FAQ page or a video or something that's interactive to answer the questions for me. And then if I have additional questions, then yeah, I'll talk to somebody. But I think social media has done this to us. Our short attention span,
Yes.
a 1 minute TikTok or something less than that has really sort of destroyed how much time we're willing to go into a website and dig around and find what we want. So bringing that to the forefront at the top of every page, as well as the homepage, I think you're spot on. I think you're right there. Are there any other tips or advice that you would give to these business owners that maybe we forgot to talk about today?
Yeah. You know how we were kind of briefly talking about the people I had to interview and how they had 30
Hmm.
clients, and some of the onus goes on the business owners too. You'll have a gut feeling when you're working with someone if they're, you know, giving you a straight answer or if they're, if you're just a number or a cog in
Yeah,
the wheel. And I would basically tell business owners like spend the time getting to know briefly the person that's on your account, who you're working with if you're working with a provider, a vendor, or an
hmm,
agency, and pick their brain. Ask them questions that you can tell if they know enough about your
yeah,
business, your industry, and their craft, their expertise in SEO. If you keep getting answers that feel repetitive, you can kind of see through that maybe they're too junior or maybe they didn't spend enough time researching you or something to that effect.
yeah,
And if they can just spend a little time getting to know them, I feel like business owners can avoid some disasters down the road of spending all this time and money on something that just didn't
yeah,
work. Because now they have a bad taste in their mouth for SEO or some of these things in general, and they haven't come across the people like
yeah.
ourselves who can actually help them with that. And all they had to do really was kind of sniff it out first. So, don't believe everything you
Hmm.
hear, kind of like ask some probing questions and really spend the time to get to know the vendor that you're working with. I think that would do wonders for a lot of businesses and prevent a lot of needless time wasting.
That would help us out too, right? Because the amount
Yeah,
of agencies out there that have given the bad negative connotation towards agencies. There's so many good agencies out there, and there's so many bad ones.
there are.
And so the business owners need to go if they're gonna hire an agency, they need to go and do just what you're saying, do the sniff test and find out if they actually know what they're doing, if they're going to be on that conveyor belt versus actually being cared for by somebody who knows what they're doing and has the experience. And I think it's pretty easy to tell. One of the services I offer at FireS Marketing is that it's if you're going to hire somebody in house, I'll do the interviews with you, I'll do them for you, I'll ask the right questions because as a business
Yeah.
owner, you don't you don't know what questions to ask. You don't really know if you're not in the SEO industry, and if you're hiring an agency, same thing. You may not know what questions to ask to know if you are just going to be put on a conveyor belt. But I think to your point though, you can tell if it seems authentic and from experience versus something that's been memorized
Hmm.
and salesy.
Exactly. Yeah. Or too good to be
Yeah.
true. If you are salivating at the numbers they're showing you, there's probably a reason it feels too good to be true.
Mhm.
And so if you see some crazy forecast, you should ask specific questions about how they're going to get you there and
Yeah.
examples or even recommendations. Like, let me speak to someone who's worked with you in the past, right?
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. Expectations are
And I would
huge. I've
recommend
worked
that.
with a lot of clients in the past who, and even coaching clients, not even agency clients, but coaching clients where they were transferred over to me from somebody else, and they're like, "Oh, I was told that, I would have X amount of dollars by this point," and I'm like, we're doing SEO consulting. Like, what do you mean?" And well, they said if I was ranked with this keyword in the top 3 results, and the top 3 results gets X percent of search, and X percent of search to my website, a 2% conversion rate would be
Yeah.
$50,000 a month. I was like, yeah, that's not really how it works. So setting those expectations right
Yeah.
up front, I think is very important for the agency owner as well as for the business to understand and have those expectations met. Otherwise, you are going to be disappointed for sure.
Yes, agreed.
Well,
100%.
Shawn, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on and be on the podcast with us today. I've learned a lot from you. CRO is so important, and I do think it's an area that's lacked for a lot of companies. I think that just like you mentioned in the beginning, people jump on and say, "I'm going to rank you for a bunch of keywords, and you're going to get a lot of traffic." But if it doesn't convert in the end, at some point, that business owner is going to be like, well, "Where's all my money going to?" Right? So I think you hit the nail on the head with that. But I appreciate you taking the time to jump on and educate us today.
Yeah, I hope this was helpful, but I had a great time. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And to everyone else who's listening out there, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. Listen, I know how valuable an hour of your time can be, and for you to take that busy time out of your day and spend it with us, it really means a lot. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider liking and subscribing on whatever platform you're on. And don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us what you thought about the interview. Ask us questions. Let us know what other digital topics you'd like to hear about in the future. We're here to add value to your life and elevate your digital presence online. If you'd like some help doing that, reach out to me at fireusmarketing.com. See you on the next one.